My name is Margaret Whitfield. I'm 68 years old, and 3 months ago, my son-in-law threw me out of the house I'd called home for 35 years. He said I was a burden, that modern families don't need elderly relatives cluttering their lives. But yesterday, I knocked on that same door with a real estate developer who offered twice the market value for the property. The color drained from Preston's face when he realized the house wasn't actually in my daughter's name. It was still in mine. What happened between that humiliating eviction and my triumphant return is a story about family, betrayal, and why you should never underestimate a grandmother who spent decades working in property law. Let me tell you how I reclaimed not just my home, but my dignity. I still remember the morning it happened, January 15th, a Tuesday. I was making breakfast, scrambled eggs with chives from my herb garden, the way I'd done every morning since my husband Harold passed 2 years ago. Preston walked in wearing his expensive suit. He didn't even say good morning. "Margaret, we need to talk," he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot I'd just brewed. He never called me Mom, not once in the 3 years since he'd married my daughter Eleanor. I turned off the stove, sensing something in his tone. "What is it, Preston?" He set down his cup and looked at me with cold blue eyes. "Eleanor and I have been discussing our living situation. We think it's time for you to consider alternative arrangements." Alternative arrangements. He made it sound like I was a piece of furniture they were replacing. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me did. I'd noticed the looks when I took too long on stairs, the sighs when I asked Eleanor to drive me to appointments. "You're getting older, Margaret. This house has 3 flights of stairs. What if you fall? There are wonderful senior communities now, places where you'd have peers, activities, medical staff nearby." I gripped the kitchen counter. This house wasn't just walls and stairs. Harold and I had bought it in 1989, raised Eleanor here. Her height marks were still penciled on the doorframe. "This is my home," I said quietly. "Actually," Preston said, triumph in his voice, "it's Eleanor's home. Has been for 6 months now, remember? You signed it over for tax purposes." My heart sank. He was right. My accountant had suggested it, said it would save Eleanor thousands in inheritance taxes. I'd trusted my daughter, never imagined. "Where is Eleanor?" I asked. "At work. She agrees this is for the best. We've already found you a nice place, Sunset Manor. They have an opening next week." "Next week?" He pushed a brochure across the counter. Smiling seniors playing cards. It looked like a hospital pretending to be a hotel. "Preston, I need to speak with my daughter." "She'll call you tonight, but the decision's made, Margaret. I've already hired movers." I stood there in my kitchen, in my robe and slippers, while this man explained how I was being evicted from my own life. The eggs grew cold on the stove. Outside, winter cardinals pecked at the feeder Harold had built. That was 3 months ago. What Preston didn't know, what would make him turn pale, was that I'd kept meticulous records, and I never signed anything without keeping copies. To understand why Preston's betrayal cut so deep, you need to know about the life Harold and I built together. We met in 1975 at a law firm in Cincinnati, Hartman and Associates. I was the office manager, having put myself through night school to learn property documentation. Harold was a real estate attorney. He was brilliant, kind, and actually listened when I spoke. Our first conversation happened over a misfiled deed. I'd found an error in one of Harold's transactions, a small boundary discrepancy that could have caused problems. Instead of being offended, he thanked me and invited me to lunch. "You have a sharp eye, Margaret," he said over sandwiches. Most people would have missed that. "I've always been detail-oriented," I replied. "My mother says I could find a needle in a haystack." He laughed, a warm sound that made me feel seen. "That's exactly the kind of mind property work needs. Too many people treat it like paperwork, but property, that's people's lives we're dealing with." We married 2 years later in a small ceremony. Instead of a European honeymoon, we spent a week driving through Ohio neighborhoods, looking at houses. Not to buy. We couldn't afford much then, but to study them. Harold taught me to read a property's history and its additions, its setbacks. Every house tells a story, he'd say. A good property professional needs to know those stories. We worked together for 10 years, building our reputation. I specialized in title searches and documentation while Harold handled transactions. We made a formidable team. Though I never went to law school, I knew property documentation better than most attorneys. Eleanor came along in 1985, when I was 32. I remember telling Harold I was pregnant. We were reviewing contracts in our home office. I slid the pregnancy test across to him like another document requiring his signature. He stared at it, then looked up with tears in his eyes. "We're having a baby?" "We're having a baby," I confirmed. He swept the contracts aside and danced me around the room. "We need a house, a real house, with a garden, good schools." That's how we found 47 Maple Grove Road, a 1920s colonial that had seen better days, but Harold saw potential. "Look at those bones," he said, running his hand along original crown molding. "This house was built to last generations. We bought it for a fraction of what it would be worth, spending weekends restoring it. Harold refinished floors while I was 8 months pregnant. I painted Eleanor's nursery soft yellow. We planted the maple tree in the front yard the week she was born. The house became our sanctuary. Harold set up his study in what used to be the smoking room. I claimed the sun porch for my office, where I could work while watching Eleanor play. We hosted dinner parties, backyard barbecues, birthday parties. Those were golden years. Our practice thrived. Our daughter grew strong and smart, and that house wrapped around us like an embrace. Harold and I would sit on the porch swing he'd installed, reviewing cases while Eleanor did homework at the kitchen table. Eleanor grew up surrounded by legal documents and dinner discussions, but she never showed interest in following our path. Instead, she fell in love with art. I still have her first real painting, a watercolor of our house with the maple tree impossibly tall. "Mom, why do you and Dad spend all day reading about houses?" she asked once, age 12, paint-stained and curious. "Because homes matter, sweetheart," I told her. "They're where people feel safe. Our job is to protect that." She nodded, then returned to her palette. "I want to make homes beautiful. You make them safe, I'll make them special." And she did. Through high school, Eleanor transformed our house into her canvas. She painted murals in her bedroom, gardens that seemed to grow from the baseboards. She refinished furniture from yard sales. Harold and I supported every artistic whim, driving her to classes, converting the basement into her studio. When she got accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design, Harold cried. "Our little artist is leaving us," he said, holding the acceptance letter. "She'll be back," I assured him. "This house is in her blood." I was right. Eleanor came home every break, bringing new techniques. She painted our kitchen cabinets with delicate vine patterns. She redesigned our garden, adding sculptures. The house evolved with her talent, becoming not just our home, but her masterpiece. After graduation, Eleanor started her interior design business from our dining room. Clients would come for consultations, admiring what she'd done with our space. Her business grew through word of mouth. Harold was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2021. The news came on a Thursday afternoon. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. I remember gripping Harold's hand as the words washed over us. "We'll fight this," I said in the car. "I know," he replied. "But Margaret, we need to talk about the house." Even facing death, Harold thought about protecting what we'd built. That night, he spread papers across his desk, deeds, insurance policies. "Everything needs to be in order," he said. Eleanor moved back home without us asking. She set up a bed in Harold's study so he wouldn't climb stairs. She painted the walls soft blue. Those last months were terrible and beautiful. Friends visited constantly. Former clients brought casseroles. "Promise me," Harold said one evening. "Promise you'll keep the house. It's Eleanor's heritage." "I promise," I said. He died on a Sunday morning in May, with Eleanor and me holding his hands. The funeral was held in our garden, under the maple tree. Our corner of Cincinnati's legal community came to pay respects. Afterward, we sat on the porch swing. "I can't imagine this place without Dad," Eleanor said. "He's not gone," I told her. "He's in every board, every flower he planted. As long as we're here, he's with us." Eleanor leaned against my shoulder. "I'll never leave, Mom. This is home." 2 years later, she met Preston Blackwood at a gallery opening. Everything changed. Preston Blackwood entered our lives like a storm system, slowly at first, then with increasing intensity. Eleanor met him at her friend's gallery opening in Cincinnati's Over-the-Rhine district. She came home that night glowing in a way I hadn't seen since Harold's death. "Mom, I met someone," she said, sitting on my bed. "His name is Preston. He's in commercial real estate development." "Tell me about him," I said, happy to see her excited. "He's different from the artists I usually date," she admitted. "He wears suits, actually owns an iron." She laughed. "But he understood my design aesthetic. He's looking for someone to stage luxury properties." Their first date was Friday. Preston arrived exactly on time, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Eleanor made monthly. He brought me flowers, not carnations, but an elegant orchid. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Eleanor's told me so much about you. I understand you worked in property documentation?" "For many years," I replied, studying him. He was handsome in a calculated way. Styled hair, shoes that gleamed like mirrors. "Fascinating field," he said. "I'm in development myself. Perhaps we could discuss market trends." He was polite, charming even, but something in his eyes reminded me of opposing counsel during tough negotiations, assessing, calculating. Their relationship progressed quickly. Within 3 months, Preston was at our house several times weekly. He'd work on proposals while Eleanor sketched beside him. But small things bothered me. The way he'd rearrange our coffee table without asking. How he'd mention property values, always noting our house was worth a fortune now. His subtle criticisms. "Eleanor, have you considered updating the kitchen? Granite countertops would really modernize the space." "Mom doesn't want to change Dad's house," Eleanor would say. "Of course," Preston would reply smoothly. "Though renovations are investments, your father would appreciate increasing the asset value." He didn't know Harold at all. 6 months in, Preston started staying overnight. I'd find him in the kitchen at dawn, making coffee with an expensive machine he'd brought. "Morning, Margaret," he'd say, not looking up from his phone. Our morning routine shifted. What used to be quiet time for Eleanor and me became Preston's business calls echoing through the house. He'd pace the garden during conferences, trampling Harold's flower beds. "He's driven," Eleanor explained when I mentioned the damaged petunias. "His company's bidding on a huge project." The first real conflict came 8 months into their relationship. I returned from shopping to find Preston in Harold's study with a measuring tape. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just getting dimensions," he said. "This would make a perfect home office." "This is Harold's study," I said. "Was," he corrected. "Eleanor mentioned you barely use it. Seems wasteful." "Get out of this room," I said quietly. That night, Eleanor apologized. "He didn't mean anything. He sees everything in terms of optimization." But Preston's influence grew. He convinced Eleanor to move her studio downtown. "More professional," he said. He brought contractors to give unrequested renovation estimates. He started receiving mail at our address without asking. The day he proposed, I knew I was losing my daughter. Not to marriage, but to a man who saw our home as an asset to be optimized. The wedding took place 10 months after Eleanor met Preston. Unlike the intimate garden ceremony she'd always dreamed of, it was held at the Ritz-Carlton with 200 guests I'd never met. Eleanor looked beautiful, but uncomfortable in a dress Preston's mother had selected. "You look lovely, sweetheart," I told her before walking down the aisle. "Do I look like myself?" she asked, touching the structured bodice. "You look like you're trying to be someone else," I answered honestly. She glanced at the door where wedding planners waited. "Preston says successful people adapt. Your father said successful people stay true to their values." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I love him, Mom. I know, I said, though I wondered if she loved Preston or the version of herself he was creating. After the wedding, changes accelerated. Preston officially moved in, bringing furniture that clashed with our home's character. Chrome and glass replaced Harold's handcrafted pieces. Our comfortable house started resembling a showroom. It's called updating the aesthetic, Preston explained when I questioned the changes. Eleanor's clients need to see we understand contemporary styles. This house has its own style, I protested. It's outdated, he interrupted. Developers call houses like this teardowns. The land is worth more than the structure. Teardown. Our home reduced to an obstacle on valuable land. Health issues crept up on me that year. Nothing dramatic. Arthritis that made stairs challenging. Blood pressure requiring monitoring. Preston noticed everything. Margaret fell again yesterday, he'd tell Eleanor, though I'd only stumbled slightly. Maybe we should consider grab bars, or perhaps a nice condo. He started leaving brochures for assisted living facilities on the counter. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Village, names designed to make institutional living sound pleasant. The conversation about signing over the house came during tax season. Preston presented it as financial strategy, papers spread across the dining table. The inheritance tax would devastate Eleanor, he explained, but if you transfer ownership now, with lifetime residency rights, we avoid the burden. I need to think about it, I said. What's to think about? Preston pressed. You'll still live here. Nothing changes except Eleanor's financial security. Eleanor sat between us, looking uncomfortable. Preston, Mom needs time. Time is what we don't have, he said. Tax laws could change. Your mother's health could decline. I looked at Eleanor, hoping she'd protest, but she was studying the papers. Preston had been working on her for months. Mom, she said finally, it would help us so much. The money saved could go toward starting a family. Grandchildren. She knew exactly what would persuade me. I thought of Harold's hope that future generations would grow up here. I'll have my own lawyer review everything, I said. When the lawyer, an old colleague, confirmed the papers were legally sound, I signed them. The house would transfer to Eleanor while I retained lifetime residency. The first sign of trouble came 3 months later. Preston hired contractors without consulting me, claiming the roof needed emergency repairs. The noise drove me to the library. When I returned, they'd accidentally damaged my bedroom ceiling. You can use the guest room, Preston suggested. It's smaller, easier to manage. The guest room was on the 3rd floor. Each climb left me breathless. Preston watched my struggles with satisfaction, disguised as concern. This isn't safe, he'd tell Eleanor. What if she falls when we're not home? The confrontation came on that Tuesday morning in January as I was making breakfast. But the real choosing moment, the line in the sand, happened 3 days later, when Eleanor finally came to see me. I'd been staying at the downtown Marriott where Harold and I used to celebrate anniversaries. The irony wasn't lost on me, paying nightly rates while my own house sat occupied by others. Eleanor knocked softly. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Mom?" she said, and then she was crying, collapsing into my arms. I guided her to the sofa. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I didn't know he was going to. I never thought." "Tell me what happened." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Preston told me you agreed to look at Sunset Manor, but Mrs. Chen called me at work. She saw you leaving with suitcases, crying." "What did Preston tell you exactly?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "That you'd become confused, argumentative, that forcing the issue was kindest." "And you believed him?" She flinched. "You have been forgetting things. Last week you called me Hannah twice." "Hannah was her high school friend. I'd been reminiscing, that's all." "Eleanor," I said carefully, "Preston told me you agreed. That you wanted me in assisted living." Her face went white. We discussed maybe daily help. But leaving the house? Never. We stared at each other, understanding dawning. Preston had played us against each other. He's been planning this, I said. The roof repairs, moving me upstairs, documenting every stumble. The papers, Eleanor whispered. Oh God, the transfer papers. He pushed so hard for those. Where is he now? At the house. He's already called contractors about renovating your room. Mom, he's talking about selling. Selling. The word came out sharp. He says as my spouse he has equal say in marital assets, since the house is in my name. There it was. The trap Preston had constructed. My daughter had to choose, her marriage or her mother. What are you going to do? I asked. Eleanor looked at me with Harold's eyes, wet but determined. I'm going to fight him, but Mom, I need help. Is there any way to stop this? I thought about the papers I'd signed, the careful language. Then I thought about my years in property documentation, finding loopholes. Maybe, I said, I need to see the original documents. And Eleanor, you need to decide now, Preston or family. You can't have both. She stood, straightening her shoulders. I choose you, Mom. I choose Dad's memory. I choose our home. He won't make it easy, I warned. Then we'll use better tools, Eleanor said. You taught me homes matter. Preston made me forget, but I remember now. First, we need you somewhere safe. If you confront Preston while emotional, I'm going to Aunt Catherine's. Already packed. I'll tell Preston I need space. Good. That gives us time. Eleanor, I need copies of every house document. Tax records, insurance, transfer papers. Can you get them without Preston knowing? She nodded. He keeps them in Dad's study. He locks it, but... She smiled slightly. He doesn't know I have Dad's old key. As Eleanor prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly. Can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive, I said. You were manipulated. What matters is what we do now. After she left, I began making lists. Preston Blackwood thought he'd won by exiling an old woman. He was about to learn what decades of protecting homes had taught me. News of my eviction spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. By the time I moved into Catherine's spare room, I had 17 voicemails from concerned neighbors and former colleagues. Mrs. Chen, our neighbor of 30 years, was particularly incensed. That man strutted around your garden yesterday, she fumed over tea. Talking about demolition permits. I wanted to spray him with my hose. Demolition? I tried to keep my voice steady. Clear as day. Said the house was a teardown, worth more as land. Catherine, Harold's sister and my dearest friend, paced her kitchen. At 71, she still had the fierce energy from her years as a federal judge. I've made calls, she said. Preston Blackwood has quite a reputation. 3 lawsuits in 5 years, all settled quietly. He specializes in acquiring undervalued properties through creative means. Meaning? Marrying into them. Eleanor isn't his first wife with property-owning parents. My blood chilled. What happened to the first wife? Catherine pulled out a file. Divorced after 4 years. Her family's farm was sold to developers 6 months after the wedding. I thought of Eleanor, staying with Catherine's daughter, probably crying herself to sleep. My poor daughter, targeted for her inheritance. The next morning, James Morrison called. We'd worked together for years before he retired. Margaret, I heard about your situation. It's unconscionable. His voice crackled with indignation. I've reviewed the transfer documents. Solid work, unfortunately. So there's nothing... I didn't say that. Every document exists in context. When exactly did you sign? March 15th last year. And your last medical checkup? February. Annual physical. Perfect. We'll need those records. Document everything about the signing. Who was present? What was said? Any pressure. You think we can challenge it? I think a grieving widow pressured by her son-in-law might not have been in the best state for such decisions. Meanwhile, Preston wasted no time. Eleanor reported he'd changed locks and installed cameras. He told neighbors I'd been confused, she said bitterly, that assisted living was doctor recommended. The community rallied. Dr. Kumar offered his guest house. The mailman redirected my mail without being asked. Saw that fancy car? Roberto said. That man tried to take your mail. I told him that's a federal crime. Even local businesses got involved. The coffee shop owner where Harold and I spent Saturdays refused to serve Preston, but the most significant consequence came from an unexpected source. 3 days after my eviction, my phone rang early. "Mrs. Whitfield? David Zhang here, Zhang Development. I heard about your housing situation." "How?" "Cincinnati's development community is small. Blackwood's acquisition of a historic property has people talking. I understand you have extensive knowledge of the area's history." "Decades worth," I confirmed. "Excellent, I'll be direct. Blackwood and I have competed before. He plays dirty. I prefer winning cleanly. I'd like to discuss a proposition." "What kind?" "The kind involving me purchasing 47 Maple Grove Road for well above market value, if you can legally make that happen. I collect historic homes. I don't tear them down." My heart raced, but I kept my voice level. "The house is currently in my daughter's name." "I'm aware. Property transfers between family can be complicated. Perhaps we should meet?" As I hung up, Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You're planning something." "Preston wants to play property games," I said. "He forgot I've been playing longer than he's been alive." The consequences of Preston's cruelty were rippling outward. He thought he'd removed an obstacle. Instead, he'd awakened a community and given me motivation to fight with everything I'd learned. The first direct confrontation came 2 weeks after my eviction. Preston had been dodging Eleanor's calls, but when she texted about needing documents, he agreed to meet. "I want you there," Eleanor said as we planned. "He can't gaslight both of us." "He won't let me in," I pointed out. "The meeting's at Starbucks, neutral ground." Her laugh was bitter. I dressed carefully, my best suit from closing arguments. Eleanor wore an artistic dress, refusing Preston's preferred corporate clothes. Preston was already there with his lawyer. My presence clearly surprised them. "Margaret," Preston said coldly, "this meeting is between Eleanor and me." "My mother stays," Eleanor said. "Unless you're afraid of witnesses?" His jaw tightened. His lawyer pulled out a folder. "Mrs. Blackwood, we've prepared a settlement." "Whitfield," Eleanor interrupted. "Excuse me?" "My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I never changed it." A small victory, but it hit Preston hard. "Fine, Ms. Whitfield. My client offers to buy out your interest for $300,000. The house is worth $800,000 minimum," I interjected. The lawyer smiled condescendingly. "You're not party to this discussion. The house needs renovations." "That you're planning anyway before flipping it," Eleanor said. "I found your permit applications. Complete demolition." Preston leaned forward. "Be reasonable. You can't maintain the house alone. Take the money." "With my mother?" He shrugged. "That's your choice. Though I'd think carefully about taking on that burden." The word hung like a challenge. Eleanor's face flushed. "My mother isn't a burden. She welcomed you into our home despite reservations." "Reservations? Is that what we're calling dementia?" "I don't have dementia," I said firmly. He pulled out his phone. "Really?" "Calling Eleanor wrong names. Forgetting conversations." "Normal grief responses," Eleanor shot back. "Empathy doesn't protect assets," Preston replied. "Your mother signed those papers freely. She's just a tenant who violated lease terms." "What lease terms?" I demanded. His lawyer slid over a document. "The residency agreement included behavioral standards. Your resistance to renovations constitutes breach." I scanned it with experienced eyes. "This clause is unconscionably broad. Any first-year student could challenge it. But you're not practicing anymore, and litigation is expensive." "No." Preston seemed shocked by Eleanor's simple refusal. "No?" he repeated. "Number I won't sell. I won't agree to renovations. I won't let you destroy my father's house." Eleanor stood. "And I want a divorce." Preston's face cycled through emotions. Surprise, anger, calculation. "You're making a mistake. I've been patient with your family situation." "Patient?" Eleanor's voice rose. "You manipulated my mother into signing over her home. You threw out a widow. That's not patience. That's cruelty." People stared. Preston's lawyer whispered urgently, "Fine. Preston said, standing. You want hardball? I'll file immediately. I'll get the house. He strode out. Eleanor sank back, shaking. You did well, I said. Did I? He's right about the law. In divorce, he could force a sale. Maybe, unless we find leverage. Eleanor looked at me hopefully. You have a plan? I have experience and an interesting call from David Zhang. I smiled grimly. Preston's about to learn why you shouldn't underestimate a property professional with nothing to lose. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, served dramatically during dinner. Preston was sending a message. He would make this painful and public. Eleanor spent that night reviewing documents with growing dismay. He's claiming I dissipated marital assets by refusing to sell. He wants immediate liquidation. Can he do that? Catherine asked. I nodded grimly. In contested divorces, courts sometimes appoint receivers to force sales. Preston's lawyers are good. So we lose? Eleanor's voice broke. Not yet. We need leverage. That leverage came the next morning. Roberto knocked with a registered letter from the county recorder's office. Inside was notice that the Historical Society had accepted my emergency application to evaluate 47 Maple Grove Road for historic designation. An inspector would visit within the week. Historic designation? Eleanor read over my shoulder. When did you? The day after Preston kicked me out. Our house is one of the last 1920s colonials. Original fixtures, period renovations. If designated. No demolition, Eleanor breathed. No major renovations without approval. Catherine laughed. Brilliant. Preston can't tear down a historic property. But Preston had resources. 2 days later, a building inspector, Preston's cousin, filed a report claiming structural damage. Unsafe for habitation. Recommend immediate demolition. He's trying to condemn it before designation, I told James Morrison. Then we need our own inspection, James said. I know someone. Can Eleanor get access? Eleanor still had her key to the basement door. Preston had forgotten about it, one of many oversights that would prove costly. Our inspector, Maria Santos, was thorough. Her report was damning for Preston. Not only is the structure sound, she told us, but someone's been deliberately damaging it. Freshwater stains, crowbar marks, amateur work trying to create problems. Can you prove it's deliberate? In court? Absolutely. These marks were made within the last week, after the house was supposedly empty. Eleanor went pale. He's destroying it anyway. That night, Eleanor made a decision that changed everything. She called David Zhang. Mr. Zhang, this is Eleanor Whitfield. I understand you spoke with my mother about purchasing our house. I watched my daughter transform from victim to warrior as she laid out the situation. Here's what I propose, she said steadily. You help us stop Preston from destroying the house, and I'll ensure you get first option to purchase, at fair price, once the divorce settles. Zhang's response was immediate. By morning, his lawyers had filed for emergency injunction preventing any alterations pending historic review. They demanded access for assessment. Preston was served at his office. According to his secretary, who called Eleanor, he threw a paperweight at the wall. He's losing control, Eleanor said. Good. The catalyst created a chain reaction. Preston's cruelty had awakened community action. The Historical Society fast-tracked our application after receiving dozens of neighbor letters. The city council member whose campaign Harold supported made calls. The Cincinnati Enquirer picked up the story. Historic home becomes divorce battleground. Preston tried damage control, claiming he was victim of a vindictive mother-in-law. But public opinion had turned. Photos circulated online. Harold's garden, Eleanor's painted cabinets, our family tree. People saw what Preston wanted to destroy. You've started something, Catherine said as we read articles. This isn't just about one house anymore. She was right. Other families contacted us with similar stories. Preston had made a career of this, but he'd finally chosen the wrong family. That night, I whispered to Harold's photo. We're fighting for our home. Eleanor found her strength. We're going to win. The battle wasn't over, but momentum had shifted. Preston was about to learn that some things couldn't be reduced to profit margins. The 3 months following the injunction were transformative for both Eleanor and our house. While Preston's lawyers filed motions, we went to work. Eleanor moved back into 47 Maple Grove Road immediately. "I'm not letting him damage it more," she declared. I joined her, despite Preston's protests. "The restraining order prevents him from entering, not me," I reminded his lawyer. Those first days back were bittersweet. Preston's sabotage was everywhere. Water stains, scratched floors, damaged cabinets. We documented everything. "He's like a child breaking toys," Eleanor said, examining gouges in the kitchen. We began restoration immediately. Eleanor's artist friends rallied. Marcus, a wood restoration specialist, spent weekends repairing damage. Sarah from Art Conservation helped preserve original fixtures. "This house is a masterpiece," Sarah said, cleaning 1920s light fixtures. "They don't build like this anymore." David Zhang proved an unexpected ally. While his lawyers handled legal complexities, he sent practical help, security systems, contractors to assess damage. He never entered without invitation, respecting our space while protecting his potential investment. "Why are you helping?" Eleanor asked during one visit. Zhang looked around thoughtfully. "My grandmother lost her family home to developers. She never recovered. When I made my fortune, I promised to preserve homes, not destroy them." Eleanor and I researched the house's history. The original builder was Joseph Henley, master craftsman who'd built only 12 homes in Cincinnati. Ours was one of 3 standing. In the attic, we found his signature carved into a beam, J.H. 1923. Below it, Harold had added, H.W. 1989, home is where love lives. "Dad knew," Eleanor whispered. "He knew this house was special." We compiled detailed history with blueprints and photographs spanning decades. Mrs. Chen contributed 1960s pictures. Dr. Kumar's father had known Henley's son and shared stories. The transformation wasn't just the house. Eleanor rediscovered herself. She stopped straightening her hair Preston's way, wore artistic clothes again, painted for joy, not clients. "I'd forgotten who I was," she told me while sorting photos. "Preston made me believe I needed to be someone else." "You were always valuable," I assured her. "He needed you to forget so he could control you." My own transformation was subtler but real. The fight reinvigorated my legal instincts. I spent hours researching precedents, building arguments. Catherine joked I was becoming myself again. "Retirement didn't suit you," she said. "You're a fighter." The historic designation hearing was set for May 15th, 3 months after my eviction. The committee would tour, review documentation, and decide. Preston made one last attempt the week before. He showed up despite the restraining order, banging on the door at midnight. "Eleanor, this is insane. We could have sold for a fortune." Eleanor called police while I watched through the window. Preston looked haggard, his perfect image cracking. As they led him away, he looked back with such hatred I shivered, but Eleanor stood firm in the doorway. "Our future was never about this house," she called. "It was about control, and you've lost it." The transformation was complete. The house stood ready for inspection. Eleanor had reclaimed her identity. I'd found purpose again, and Preston revealed himself so thoroughly that no expensive suit could cover the ugliness. The morning of the hearing, Eleanor and I stood in Harold's garden. "Whatever happens," Eleanor said, linking arms with me, "we fought for what mattered." "He would be proud," I agreed, "of both of us." We were ready to face the committee and secure our home's future. The historic designation hearing took place on a beautiful May morning. The committee arrived at 9 a.m., led by Dr. Patricia Holbrook, an architectural historian. "Mrs. Whitfield," she greeted warmly, "I remember your husband. He helped my daughter with property issues years ago." Eleanor and I guided them through the house, showing original features, hand-carved moldings, butler's pantry, the telephone nook with Harold's restored 1920s phone. "Remarkable preservation," one member murmured, photographing original radiators. Increasingly rare. Dr. Holbrook was particularly interested in Henley's signature beam. "Only 12 homes," she said reverently. "This may be the best preserved." "3 generations of love," Eleanor said. "My grandparents, parents, and hopefully, my children." The committee spent 3 hours documenting. As they left, Dr. Holbrook pulled me aside. "Off the record, I've rarely seen a stronger case. The decision takes 2 weeks, but I'm optimistic." Those weeks crawled by. Preston's lawyers filed emergency motions claiming designation would constitute illegal taking of property rights. Zhang's team countered every move. The call came Thursday afternoon. Eleanor and I were planting Harold's roses. "Unanimous approval," Dr. Holbrook announced. 47 Maple Grove Road is now a Cincinnati historic landmark. Eleanor dropped her trowel and hugged me, both crying. We'd done it. The house was protected. Preston's reaction was swift. His lawyer demanded immediate liquidation. "Historic designation doesn't prevent sales," he argued, "just alterations." "Tell your client," Eleanor replied calmly. "I'll see him in divorce court, and remind him that damaging historic property is now a federal crime." The divorce trial began in July. Public opinion had shifted completely. The Cincinnati Enquirer ran features with before and after photos showing Preston's damage. Preservation groups testified. Even Preston's first wife sent a letter detailing his pattern. Preston took the stand, still playing victim. But when Eleanor's lawyer, James Morrison from retirement, presented evidence of staged damage, his composure cracked. "You deliberately damaged historic property," James stated. "You isolated an elderly woman through manipulation. You attempted profit from grief." "It was a business decision," Preston snapped. "That house is worth more as land." "And there it is," James interrupted. "Not a home, not family legacy, just land value." The judge's decision was swift. The house remained Eleanor's sole property. Preston's fraud voided any claim. He was ordered to pay damages. The restraining order became permanent, but true redemption came after legal victories. Eleanor proposed turning the first floor into a museum showcasing Henley's craftsmanship while living upstairs. "Dad said homes are where people feel safe," she explained to Zhang. "This way, it serves the community while staying in our family." Zhang agreed and offered funding. Living history, better than my original plan. The opening was in September. Half Cincinnati attended, neighbors, preservation advocates, students, even Preston's first wife came. "You did what I couldn't," she said. "You fought back." Eleanor met Thomas at the opening, an architect specializing in historic preservation. Unlike Preston, he understood immediately why the house mattered. "It's not just beautiful," he told Eleanor. "It's loved." Their wedding, 1 year later, was in the garden under our maple tree. I officiated, having passed the bar exam again at 70, partly for fun, partly to prove Preston wrong. "Your father said this house would shelter generations," I told Eleanor at the reception. "He was right." Eleanor touched her stomach meaningfully. "Mom, I'm pregnant." I hugged my daughter, tears happy now. Preston's cruelty had forced us to fight, brought community together, and made the house's protection permanent. Harold would have found that fitting. That destruction attempts had preserved instead. That greed awakened generosity. That love proved stronger than those who saw only price. 3 years have passed since Preston Blackwood tried to steal my home. I'm writing this from Harold's study on a quiet Sunday, watching my granddaughter Louise play in the garden where her mother once played. The house at 47 Maple Grove Road stands stronger than ever. The first-floor museum draws steady visitors, architecture students, families exploring Cincinnati's history, elderly neighbors sharing memories. Eleanor and Thomas live upstairs, filling rooms with new laughter while honoring old memories. Preston's story ended predictably. After our case, more ex-wives came forward. Investigation revealed a pattern spanning years. He lost his real estate license, faced federal charges for damaging historic properties, and eventually fled to Florida where, last I heard, he sells timeshares, fitting for someone who confused homes with commodities. But this isn't about revenge. It's about redemption and resilience. Eleanor transformed from a woman who'd lost herself into a fierce protector of heritage. She runs the museum passionately, teaching visitors that houses become homes through the families who love them. She's returned to painting, capturing Cincinnati's historic homes. Thomas proved the partner Preston never was. He supports Eleanor's work, respects our family history, and spent weekends helping restore Harold's workshop. Every home needs a workshop, he says, echoing Harold. Louise, now 2, has Harold's eyes and Eleanor's artistic spirit. She knows Papa Harold from stories, understands our house is special. Last week, I caught her telling her doll, "This is our forever home." David Zhang became an unexpected friend. He never purchased our house, but has preserved 6 other Cincinnati historic homes, creating a foundation for keeping families in generational properties. He brings international visitors to our museum, proud of the house that changed my mission. The legal community welcomed me back warmly. At 71, I don't take new cases but consult on elder property disputes. Too many face what I faced: manipulation, predatory developers, assumptions that age equals incompetence. My story helps them fight. Catherine passed last year. She left me her house, joking in her will about my collection. I donated it to Zhang's foundation for a family who'd lost their home to medical debt. The neighborhood revived too. Our fight sparked a movement. Families researching histories, applying for designations, resisting developers who see only dollar signs. Mrs. Chen's grandchildren started documenting Cincinnati's architectural heritage online. Dr. Kumar's son became a preservation lawyer. Sometimes I sit on Harold's porch swing, watching the street where we built our life. The maple tree towers over the house now, branches reaching protectively. Preston saw that tree as an obstacle. We see it as endurance symbolized. I think about the morning Preston kicked me out, how broken I felt. He counted on that feeling persisting, on age and grief making me weak. He didn't understand that mothers defending their children's heritage don't break. They become diamonds under pressure. The house taught me what Harold always knew. We don't own property. We're temporary guardians, preserving it for those who come after. Preston saw ownership as power over others. Harold saw it as responsibility to others. My story spread beyond Cincinnati. I receive letters from adult children reconnecting with estranged parents, from elderly people finding courage to fight their own Prestons, from communities organizing to preserve histories. One developer wrote that our story made him remember why he entered the business, to create homes, not just profits. These ripples are Harold's true memorial, not just the preserved house, but awakened consciousness that homes matter, elderly voices deserve respect. Family isn't about inheritance, but inheriting values. I'm teaching Louise about property in simple stories. Houses remember the families who love them, I tell her. She nods solemnly, patting walls like pets. Maybe that's sentimental to Preston types. But Louise will grow up knowing her great-grandfather built dreams into these walls. Her grandmother fought to preserve them. Her mother chose heritage over convenience. She'll understand we're living in a story of love, conquering greed. Next month marks the 35th anniversary of our moving here. Eleanor's planning a celebration for everyone who fought to save this house. But for me, the real celebration is quieter. Louise playing where Eleanor played, Thomas in Harold's workshop, generations of love under one preserved roof. Preston tried to steal my home. Instead, he taught me its value. Not in market price, but in lives sheltered, memories held, futures promised. He's gone, forgotten except as cautionary tale. But the house stands, proving some things can't be bought, sold, or stolen. They can only be loved, fought for, and passed on.